Buonasera, bentrovati a questa platea molto bella. Per me è un'occasione interessante essere qui a questa università e sentivo da questo spot appunto costruire il nostro futuro dal punto di vista anche economico, che è molto importante. Allora, la sessione di oggi è la grammatica della cooperazione, fiducia, norme sociali e motivazioni economiche, una sessione dedicata ovviamente all'economia civile e sociale. Voglio dire che per chi ha bisogno, necessità di traduzione, può inquadrare il QR code e da quello potrà avere la traduzione simultanea. Siamo d'accordo? Allora, mi permetto di fare una breve introduzione perché credo sia importante e poi ci infiliamo, diciamo, nel cuore di questa sessione perché si parla di grammatica della cooperazione. Che cosa intendiamo dire? Che è proprio l'insieme di regole che poi formano un'economia sociale e civile. Detto questo, una cooperazione economica si basa sicuramente, vedo il professor Becchetti che saluto, buonasera, che si basa fortemente su delle regole implicite, no? Che sono la fiducia, in primis, ma non soltanto, quindi anche delle norme sociali, ma anche delle motivazioni che a volte sono intrinseche tra loro. Dunque, questo è quello che poi vorremmo sviluppare in questa sessione. Lo faremo ovviamente con degli esimi professori e ai quali poi potremmo rivolgere delle domande, ma soltanto a chiusura di sessione, in modo che abbiamo una panoramica ampia, totale, e a quel punto magari possiamo formulare delle domande che possono essere interessanti sicuramente. Dicevo che ovviamente il quadro di riferimento è molto ambizioso perché si infila proprio in un piano d'azione europeo per l'economia sociale. Allora, tutto questo significa confrontarsi intanto con dei paradigmi che fanno parte di un'economia civile, dell'economia civile, ma anche con l'Agenda 2030 delle Nazioni Unite e dunque della Strategia Nazionale per lo Sviluppo Sostenibile. A questo punto, io dopo questa breve introduzione, vorrei che mi raggiungesse Stefano Papa, perché lui è intanto docente di politica economica presso l'Università di Roma Tor Vergata, dove appunto proprio ieri c'è stato l'incontro di economia civile, Stefano Papa, e farà appunto una sua presentazione e poi andremo avanti con la sessione.
Thank you, Marzia, for introducing me. Thank you for invitation. Thank you everybody, professors, especially Professor Becchetti for the invitation, for giving the opportunity to introduce Martin Duffenberg. I will try to build a bridge between civil economy, behavioral economics, psychological game theory, in order to introduce the keynote speaker that is my friend of mine, Professor Martin Duffenberg. What we know about this kind of conference that civil economy offer an alternative way of understanding economic activity, one no longer focused only on profit and GDP growth, but oriented toward overall human being, including life satisfaction, happiness, quality of relationship, common goods, responsibility, and sustainability. From this perspective, markets, institutions, and civil society collaborate to generate value that is not only economic, but also social and environmental. Firms are called upon to combine efficiency with the responsibility, while citizens become consumers capable of shaping markets through conscious choices. An important contribution from this vision comes from behavioral economics that challenge the traditional assumption of homo economicus, that people are perfectly rational and have selfish preference. Research on experimental economics shows that people have a sexual preference, cares not only about the payoff, but also the payoff of the others, cares how the payoff are distributed among me and the others, cares about the perceived intention underlying the intentions, and the beliefs. The second order beliefs also matters. That is what I expect the other people expect from me. In this element play a particular role in shaping the expectation and behavior. Within this framework, the Martin Duffenberg's works in psychological game theory provide a powerful approach of understanding how beliefs-dependent preference shape behavior. In this approach, individuals care not only about their payoff, but also about the psychological consequence of their action, such as regret, guilt, disappointment, anger, frustration, especially when expectations are not met. These dynamics are deeply connected to second-order beliefs. People often behave in a ways to avoid disappointment when others expect from them. When the expectations are not met, uncooperative behavior may generate anger in those who experience this negative experience, as well guilt in those who cause this negative emotion by such behavior. Importantly, when such emotions are anticipated, when individuals are sensitive to not let down other expectations down, a no pro-social behavior may be reduced or cancelled out. Behavioral economics has shown that trust, reciprocity, responsibility, social norms, attention to the other emotion are not peripheral aspects of economic interaction, but a central and fundamental component of strategic behavior. Civil economy places emphasis on this dimension, arguing that cooperation and the quality of the relationship are not constraints of efficiency, but resources. In this sense, integrating the insight from behavioral economics, psychological game theory, contribute to more human-centered economic model, capable of promoting sustainable development and social cohesion. Psychological game theory, in particular, help us to understand the grammar of the cooperation, the system of expectation, emotion, reciprocity, social norm that allows cooperative behavior emerge and persist. Professor Martin Duffenberg from Purdue University is the one of leading researchers in psychological game theory. His work extended the standard game theory model by incorporating beliefs and emotion in the utility function. Together with Questa in 2004, he developed the theory of sequential reciprocity. Later, with Pierpaolo Battigalli in 2007, introduced guilt in games. And in today's lecture, Martin will discuss how communication, in particular promises, shape beliefs and behavior. So it's a particular pleasure for me and a personal honor to have with him 5 publications in international journal and to have the opportunity to introduce him to this conference. Please join me in welcoming Professor Martin Duffenberg on the stage.
Thank you so much, Stefano, for that very kind introduction. Thank you, Leonardo and Luca, for inviting me and organizing. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for being in this session. I anticipated that Stefano would say nice things about me, so I put on the first slide a picture from when he picked me up last time I was in Rome. All right, so now I will be a little bit critical because I think that's part of the theme of Renaissance economics. You see, I walk around with 3 complaints about how economic research about human behavior is done these days. Number 1, economic theorists don't care enough about psychology. Number 2, behavioral economists, which are also known as folks who care about psychology and economics, do not care enough about theory. And number 3, experimentalists do not care enough about theory. So the theme of my presentation will be to try to do something about it. Now, Stefano may already have whet your appetite, because I would like to argue that many forms of human motivation is what could be called belief dependent. Beliefs play an important role. And it turns out that to model these kind of effects, you need to draw on a special mathematical framework called psychological game theory. And I'm working on this for many years, developing this framework, and in particular together with my good friend and co-author, seen here when we were finishing a paper together, Pier Paolo Battigalli from Bocconi. This picture is taken in not far from here, Ischia. Okay? And, you know, this framework is useful if you want to model different things, and I'll mention three. One is reciprocity, you know, the motivation where people want to be kind to people who are kind to them and unkind to people who are unkind to them. If you start reflecting on the nature of kindness, you will see that you need this framework. I'm not going to talk about reciprocity today. I will also not talk about the second thing you can model, which is image concerns, where you care about others' opinions about you in various ways. Okay, I'm just flagging. Okay, the thing I will talk about is emotions, and there are many emotions that, if you try to describe them, you know, in a formal way, you are led to use this mathematical framework. Guilt, anxiety, elation, disappointment, anger, fear, regret. I will talk about two of them today, okay? And I put them in purple, guilt and anger. So 2 parts to the talk, guilt and anger. Actually 3 parts to the talk, but you'll see. And just to flag, you know, for those of you who have studied game theory, you know that you have utility functions in traditional game theory, and it's the blue stuff. So you have functions for a player I. Z is the set of end nodes in a game tree, and you have numbers written there, and they describe preferences. That's the idea. But in psychological game theory, you take that cross product with beliefs. So you don't have numbers at the end node reflecting utilities, but you have expressions that are more complicated. And I'll tell you how you will do to capture interesting, fun, emotional parts. Okay? So let's illustrate the purple ones, and I'm going to take off my jacket so I can, let's see. There we go. All right. I'm going to flag for one piece of mathematical notation. In the things I will present, I will use alpha for players' beliefs. So alpha will be probability distributions over Z, the set of end nodes in a game, and it will be beliefs conditional on any history that may happen in the game. Any, you know, a game tree will describe sequences of decisions, and they are called histories, and we will have beliefs floating around there. I'm just flagging. I'll show you a specific example now, okay? Presentazione in 3 parti. Okay. Part 1, let's talk about guilt. Okay, part 1 is going to be an old study I did many years ago, and part 2 is going to be a new contemporary one. The old one is concerned with guilt. I worked a lot on feelings of guilt. Uri Gnisi, who's sitting back there, my good friend and co-author on a paper that we ran, our very first experiment was related to guilt back many years ago. Then Pier Paolo Battigalli and I have developed a general theory, and what I will talk about is work together with Gary Charnes that followed the other things here mentioned. And you can see the 3 I mentioned so far, Uri, Per Paolo and me, that's taken recently at Foro Italica for those of you who are interested in tennis. Okay, so quick shift to this game now. This is a game with 2 players. I'm going to call them A and B. First, I have to teach you what a game tree is, okay? You see one here. So this is a simple little game where player A moves first, can choose between out And in that case, if it goes out, they get €5 each. You see 5 and 5, 5 to player A and 5 to player B. On the other hand, if player A goes in, then B has a die in his hand, and he can either roll it or don't roll it. Okay? If he rolls it, it's going to cost him 4. He's going to go down from payoff 14 to 10. But rolling the die is good for player A, who stands a chance of getting 12. You know, if the die comes up 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, which is probability 5 over 6, then he gets 12. So it's 10 in expectation, okay? So if the two players play in and roll, they double their money in expectation. They go from 5 and 5 to 10 and 10. However, the thing is that player A has to trust B here, because B can act selfishly and choose don't roll, okay? And that's at the expense of player B. The blue stuff you see in numbers is what you would have in a traditional economic model, okay? And you can see that if the players were maximizing their monetary payoff, then player B would choose don't roll because 14 is bigger than 10. And if player A anticipates that, he would go out, and they would have an inefficient outcome. They get less than they could have if they relied instead of in and roll, okay? Let's now make the story more interesting by adding an emotion, okay? So I'm going to use my alpha from before, and in particular, I'm going to look at this. Let's see if I have no pointer, okay. So alpha A or that expression is the belief of player A at the beginning of the game that player B would roll. So it's the probability that player A assigns to B rolling. So multiply that with 10, and you have the expected payoff of player A if he goes in, okay? Now, if player B responds by not rolling, he's going to surprise player A and give him 0. And the idea is that if you do that, you feel guilt. You feel guilt when you don't live up to others' expectation, when you give them less than they expect, okay? Now, of course, player B doesn't know A's expectation, but he can have a belief about it. So he will, this thing says he will consult his belief, okay? And then you can see that now you have a psychological game because you don't have a number here. You have an expression that believes, that depends on player A's belief about what B will do. And it's reflecting how player B would feel guilty if he chose to don't roll. Okay. Now, I mentioned that the study I'm going to talk about is joint with Gary Charnes. Gary was a big friend of many here in Rome. A wonderful guy. He sadly passed away almost to the day 2 years ago. So I put in a special picture of Gary here. Some of you in the room will know him. Thank you for everything, Gary, my friend. I miss you so much. The study I'm talking about was done jointly with him. Now, Gary and I had this idea that given that you have this model where you have an emotion floating around, maybe it matters that people talk to each other. Imagine that player B can send a message to player A and say, hey, I know that there are issues here where we have to trust each other, but I promise you that if you go in, I will roll. Okay? That might feed a circle of beliefs about beliefs such that you would actually feel guilty if you let him down. The model of guilt that I presented harmonizes very well with spoken language, right? So that a promise may serve as a trust builder and cooperation builder, okay? We can use this kind of model to tell such a story. And Gary and I decided to test it experimentally. So we had treatments where we invited students to the lab. They played this game. And we had treatments where where they just played the game, and we had other treatments where player B could send a message to player A before play started. And then we measured what their choices were, we measured their beliefs in various ways in the lab, and we tested the hypothesis that, higher beliefs would lead to higher role probabilities, and that this would happen especially when in the treatment with messages, and in that treatment with messages it would happen especially if people sent promises. So now I will show you what kind of messages were sent. Okay, so here you have a sheet of paper given to player B, and he can write whatever he wants to player A. This guy wrote, "Choose in and I will roll, you have my word." Now you can ask yourself, would you trust this guy? Another one, oh, this one got damaged. Let's forget about that. Oops. Two of them, this is not how it's supposed to look. This one I remember ended with saying, George W. Bush wants you to go in, Bin Laden says out. It was run right after September 11th, this study. The last one apparently came in here. So it's most of them talk about the game. Most of them issue promises, try to build trust and cooperation. There are exceptions. I'm giving you one here. This one says, I have to do laundry tonight and I really don't want to do it, but I don't have any clean underwear left and I don't want to go commando tomorrow. We'll see what I decide tonight. This man acts funny, doesn't he? But he seems cool. He's quite a character. All this mystery is kind of cool. And then we looked at the data, and the data basically bore out the theory I said, words tend to be promises, and they lead to higher in rates and higher roll rates. So it's a sunny picture of trust and cooperation once you open up the model to include feelings of guilt. All right, that was study number one. Now comes part two of my talk. Part two is research I'm working on right now. It's in a sense analogous to the previous one, but it's going to be a new game, a new emotion, and new messages. Okay, I'm going to present credible threats, ongoing project with Flora Lee to Museum to the left and Alex Smith. Think about communicated threats. Here you have a decision maker making a communicated threat, okay? It's interesting, but there are many other examples that you have seen. Because there are people who issue threats all the time. Putin flagged potential use of nuclear weapons. Trump claimed that he stopped wars with the threats of tariffs. And in the midst of conflict, Israel, Iran, and the US spokesperson declared that further attacks would be retaliated. The president of the US in particular is issuing threats almost daily. Here is one where he said, Tuesday will be power plant day and bridge day, all wrapped in one in Iran. There will be just nothing like it. Open the freaking strait, you crazy people, or you'll be living in hell. This is very much a verbal threat. Okay? Now, if you start looking at traditional game theory leaves almost no room for verbal threats to matter. So take this game. This is a new game now, not the same as before. It's player 1 and player 2, not A and B. I am just changing their names. So player 1 can choose share, and then player 1 gets 7 and player 2 gets 13. Or he can try to take. And then player 2 can accept. Accept means that you transfer 10 units of monetary payoff from player 1 to player 2. You go from 7 to 17. Okay? But player 2 has some power. He can punish. Okay? Now the thing is that if you apply traditional game theory, for instance, if you assume that these payoffs are utilities, then player 2 is going to think 3 is better than 0. And he's going to accept, and the other player would figure out and share. And this is kind of independent of whether they talk beforehand or not. And we develop a theory where this is no longer the case, and it's building on psychological game theory. Okay, namely, we invoke the emotion of anger. So anger can really change the calculus here. Anger is not independent of beliefs. It's important in social punishment. We'll see that threats may influence expectations, trigger anger, and become self-fulfilling. So there is a notion in psychology called the frustration-aggression hypothesis. It says that people who unexpectedly have their goals denied to them become frustrated and aggressive and angry. And that's what we're going to model, okay? I gave this talk and a person in the audience got so excited he sent me this t-shirt. This is me here. The t-shirt says, "Control your emotions you must, or forever will the dark side cloud you. Give in to your anger," says Darth Vader. All right, so I's frustration in the theory at the history is the positive difference, I'll just talk about it in words now, between what I expected at the previous history and the best he can still get. So let me just say this in words. So you have an expectation of what you will get, okay, and then something happens. If there is a gap between what you expected to get before and the most you think you can have now, then we call that frustration, okay? And it depends on beliefs, a prior belief that you had about what would happen. And then the utility function is such that PIZ is the material payoff, the monetary payoff at Z. So you care about money, your own money, but you also have a negative payoff of the other player, J's money. How much of a negative input into the utility is that? Well, it depends on how frustrated you are. That's how the model works. So this is, again, a psychological game. And then you do this game, this model, you can, first of all, without communication, see that it's possible that you get deterrence intuitively. If player 2 expects player 1 to be going to share, okay, then player 2 is expecting to get 13. Given that player 1 takes, he's now frustrated because he can no longer get 13, he can only get 3. Right? And given that he's willing to, he becomes aggressive and is preferring to get 0, okay? That's how the theory works out. On the other hand, if you don't have that belief, then you're not expecting to get 13, you're expecting to get at most 3. Then you don't like it when the other guy takes, but you're not frustrated, you're resigned. Resigned people aren't frustrated and they don't get mad, okay? So you have multiple possibilities here. Now, the idea we introduce is that if you have communication from player 2 to player 1, let's think of it as a verbal threat from player 2 to player 1, then maybe you can bring about the orange outcome instead of the green one, right? So we explore that experimentally. We tell the story theoretically and we explore it experimentally. So we have subjects play the game many times. The game changes to this one if you consider, you know, a setting where there are 2 messages you can send. You can send a threatening message or not to, and the theory we launch is the yellow one there, right? That you would deter player 1 from taking if and only if you send a verbal threat, okay? Let's see some example of messages being sent from player 2 to player 1. Pick share or I will choose 0. Another one said, let's not waste time unless you both want us to get 0. A third one says, 100% not going to give you 17 if only to spite you for being greedy AF. There is no prisoner's dilemma here. I'm going to nuke the round if you choose take. Okay, now I'm going to show you the data question mark. Why the question mark? Well, many of you here are doing empirical work, and I have a little message, something I've been thinking about a long time. And here is my friend Peter Martinsson and I, and we published a couple of years ago a paper where we advocate the following approach when doing empirical work. Journals should insist that the submitted articles do not reveal the empirical results. All the data along with the statistical analysis should be submitted in a sealed envelope. The editors and referees should evaluate the submission based only on the interest of the research method and the relevance of the empirical method. After making their accept-reject decision, the editors may open the envelope. Why did we suggest this? There are many reasons. Because if you look at the results, there is a risk that people only publish significant findings and you get a misleading impression of overall results. That's one thing. The one we emphasize the most in the paper is the last one, eliminating incentives for scientific misconduct. If journals are allowed to condition publishability on the nature of the data, then that creates an incentive for researchers that have careers at stake at fabricating data. And if you go with our proposal, you solve this potential problem of research result falsification. Okay, why did I say this? It kind of seems unrelated. Well, it has a corollary. The corollary is that since I propose to evaluate publishability without regard to the results, I will now underscore that by not telling you about them during this presentation. Sorry about that, and it's kind of opportune because then I can stay on time. Instead, I come to part 3, finalmente, of my presentation, okay? Part 3. Now it's going to be a third theory, and it's going to be a Roman theory. So, you know, both with promises and with threats, I told the story of potential emotions giving truth-telling, tying into Uri's topic about lying a bit yesterday, right? Because it's like you make a promise and it turns out to be true. You make a threat and it would be true if you were challenged in these two theories, right? But now a third theory. Can we imagine some other reason why people keep their word, promises or threats? I found an answer here in Rome, and that's going to be my end once, but you have to guess what the answer is. Anyone? I'll show you then. Grazie. The nose might grow. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Please have a seat here, please. Thank you. You can sit here. So, thank you. Thanks a lot. Allora, adesso noi avremmo diciamo, un confronto, come vi dicevo prima, tra varie personalità, le ascoltiamo e poi avremo la possibilità anche di fare loro delle domande, porre loro delle domande. Allora, ci abbiamo collegata Sarah de Heusch, direttrice di Social Economy Europe, che dovrebbe essere collegata con noi, vediamo se riusciamo a vederla in questo schermo alle mie spalle.
Buongiorno.
Eccola qua, buongiorno, grazie di essere con noi. Poi vado a chiamare Sergio Gatti, che è direttore di Federcasse-BCC, che rappresenta il sistema italiano del credito cooperativo. La prego di raggiungerci. E Marco Marcocci, che è vicepresidente nazionale di Conf Cooperative con delega al welfare. Grazie di essere qui con noi. Accomodatevi accanto a me, ovviamente. E nel frattempo io ho subito una domanda, ovviamente si presentano e si conoscono con Duferberg. Allora, una domanda per Sarah de Heusch, perché appunto abbiamo detto lei è direttrice di Social Economy Europe e quindi volevo chiedere se effettivamente Sarah, mi piacerebbe capire proprio da te la prospettiva europea di quello che stiamo dicendo oggi, anche in virtù della tematica che stiamo trattando in questa sessione.
Grazie. Mi è stato detto che potevo parlare in inglese, mi viene più facile, quindi I'm going to skip to English. Thank you very much. Well, here I'm going to bring the perspective of social economy, which is a very specific approach of the economy and how economy and society should be embedded. And in particular, I was asked also previously to talk about what's happening at the European level with the Social Economy Action Plan and how this can help in the rethinking the economy that we want, right? So social economy, just to make sure, because social economy has a very different understanding following where people live, their experience of social economy, and so on. So very quickly, what it is about, it's a diverse economy that is recognized at European level and defined as an economy that runs under three different principles: the ones of the primacy of the social objective over profit, the reinvestment of most profit in the social objective, and democratic governance. And classically, we'll find here associations, cooperatives, foundations, mutuals, and social enterprises. What's interesting, what happened in 2021 is that there's been a push by the European Commission to promote the social economy through a social economy action plan. And why did they want to do this? Because here we're talking, I'm not going to be talking about individual psychological approach. I'm going to more talk about European policies linked to this specific economy that is social economy. Why was there the recognition of social economy as being an important element and needing a level playing field? First of all, it's because of its economic and tangible and intangible added value. When we talk about the economic, tangible added value of social economy, we're talking about over 4 million enterprises and associations. We're talking about more than 11 direct employment. We're talking about a turnover in 2021 of about €1 trillion. We're talking about 95 million members of cooperatives throughout Europe and over 135 million of members of associations. And these are just the tangible added value. When we talk about intangible added values, these have been recognized by a lot of researchers, of course, but also big institutions, not only the European Commission, but also the OECD, the ILO, the United Nations. And it has been proven that social economy provides innovative solutions to big challenges of our times. Challenges like the green transition, quality jobs for all, social inclusion, social protection, and universal access to quality social services, local, regional, and rural development, social and technological innovation, and more. In fact, I would add democracy. Because democracy is not just about voting for people who will take decisions for us. Democracy can be something that is lived within the enterprises and associations. So how did the EU decide to make a level playing field for this economy? Through three key dimensions and 63 actions. There's been a midterm review that was just released. The three main ways to support this economy is to develop condition frameworks. So basically working with the legislation, talking about taxation, public procurement, state aid, but also local policies. And then the second dimension is supporting and opening opportunities for social economy. So business support, adapted business support, because these enterprises and associations don't work like mainstream capitalistic enterprises. They have different ways of working because of the principles I mentioned earlier. So they need specific support, they need adapted funding, and they can also contribute to the green and digital transition and social innovation, as we mentioned. But also, this type of economy needs a far more bigger recognition and a raising awareness through adapted statistics, through data, but also by communicating on it largely. So the Social Economy Action Plan wasn't built to create more trust between social enterprises, institutions, and citizens, but by providing a level playing field for social economy actors, it aims at empowering social economy enterprises and organizations to flourish fully. And that means promoting an economy that embeds societal needs and economic practice by design. It also means collaboration between local authority and social economy in delivering services and products that answer local needs, not that create needs, that answer local needs. And also that promotes, that answer these needs rather than just being linked to the profit accumulation. And so such an economy that really is focused on societal needs increases democracy, social justice, locally embedded economy. That means that where where a product and a service is created, the wealth is also kept. And this is exactly what we need to create trust. And maybe this is where I come back to what has just been said. We need trust in our society. This is really what is missing because we see a mismatch between economic development and redistribution, but also the power on democracy. Who has the decisions? What are the legislations? Who are they functioning for? And this social economy action plan builds a framework that sets ground for more trust between the social economy enterprises, institutions, and citizens.
Grazie. Grazie Sarah de Heusch, che ovviamente invito a rimanere perché vogliamo andare avanti e poi, come vi dicevo prima, possiamo anche collaborare e partecipare insieme proprio per tutti i temi che sono stati sollecitati, no? Anche da Sarah de Heusch, la quale diceva che la social economy è una grande opportunità e poi però bisogna capire anche come attuarla. Sergio Gatti, lei dirige Federcase, il sistema scusate, Federcasse, del sistema delle banche cooperative di credito, che per definizione sono delle banche che sono vicine alla gente, prosperano e innovano basandosi sulla fiducia. Fiducia è un termine che ha riportato pesantemente, oserei dire questo termine, nella migliore accezione della terminologia, il professor Diefenberg proprio nella sua lezione, no? Quindi la fiducia quanto è importante. Allora, è il capitale effettivamente più costoso da costruire in qualche modo, no? Perché poi è questa la vera verità. Allora, volevo capire proprio l'opinione e la posizione di Sergio Gatti, proprio per quanto riguarda la sua posizione di Federcasse-BCC, ovviamente.
Grazie molte Marzia, buon pomeriggio a tutte e a tutti, grazie per questa bellissima occasione. Rispondo subito, poi magari dedicherò anche una riga alla nostra collega da Bruxelles e anche al professor, se lo consentirà, Dufbenberg, sorry. Allora, la fiducia intanto è uno dei pilastri del paradigma dell'economia civile, che è poi il grande motore teorico che ci spinge oggi anche a vivere questa conferenza, questo momento straordinariamente importante e arricchente di confronto tra studiosi. Noi siamo dei practitioners, quindi siamo qui in punta di piedi. Ma la fiducia è anche, tu lo dicevi, il cuore delle relazioni tra le persone, il cuore delle relazioni tra imprese, il cuore dovrebbe essere delle relazioni tra stati. In questo momento abbiamo appunto qualche immagine di leoni che ci spaventano, come ci ha presentato il professor Dufbenberg. Quindi la nostra esperienza, l'attività bancaria si fonda sulla fiducia per una ragione fondamentale. Per poter fare credito bisogna raccogliere risparmio. Il risparmio te lo portano se tu ispiri fiducia. Quindi è davvero la materia prima, la risorsa rara, la terra rara, che è diffusa a differenza delle terre rare che sono oggetto anche di conflitti e che spesso dimentichiamo. Quindi in particolare allora le nostre banche che sono non soltanto vicine alle persone, alla gente, ma sono di proprietà delle persone. Questo è molto importante, cioè i proprietari, il modello proprietario delle banche di credito cooperativo, che sono cooperative a mutualità prevalente, hanno soltanto dei proprietari e delle proprietarie che sono persone fisiche e persone giuridiche che vivono o operano nei territori dove quella singola banca e community bank, potremmo dire un Raiffeisenbank o Volksbank in Germania, dove quella banca opera e opera in quella ristretta area di competenza, dando vita a quella che abbiamo chiamato la finanza adesso vediamo anche se riuscite a capire la seconda parte del geo, perché raccolgono le nostre banche il risparmio in un preciso territorio e per almeno il 95% del credito che si eroga attraverso quel risparmio, attraverso la trasformazione di quel risparmio, deve essere erogato nel territorio che ha generato il risparmio, quindi la finanza geocircolare. Questo è un ulteriore elemento di fiducia indiretta, forse neanche direttamente percepita, ma io poco alla volta divento consapevole, 1,5 milioni di soci in Italia, 7,5 milioni di clienti delle nostre cooperative bancarie, capiscono che il loro risparmio viene reinvestito in famiglie, di imprese, quindi in lavoro di quel territorio. Questo è un carburante di fiducia che probabilmente altre banche non hanno ovviamente tanti altri carburanti, ovviamente non c'è nessuno più bravo di altri. Secondo elemento è come la fiducia sia alla base, sia nella visione dell'economia civile, quindi del suo fondatore Antonio Genovesi, sia nella pratica quotidiana, è il cuore dell'economia relazionale, in particolare della banca di relazione. La banca di relazione non è una definizione di marketing, non è un'affermazione propagandistica, è un cosiddetto paradigma convenzionale descritto per la prima volta circa 25 anni fa negli Stati Uniti da due studiosi americani, colleghi della maggior parte delle persone che sono qui presenti, che definirono la banca di relazione come una banca che pone al centro della propria metodologia di fare banca la capacità di leggere l'affidabilità della famiglia o dell'impresa sulla base sia di hard information, cioè i numeri sostanzialmente, sia di soft information, che sono appunto quegli elementi che hanno a che fare con la reputazione del richiedente un credito, con la storia personale, con la famiglia, con la storia della famiglia, so o non so se paga i contributi a chi lavora, so o non so che non paga tutte le tasse, tutte queste cose che non si trovano nelle hard information, cioè nei bilanci, nei piani strategici, si ottengono, si captano stando nei territori. Quindi la banca di relazione, che è come dire, appunto un modello teorico, viene in qualche modo, direi, piuttosto ben interpretato nel nostro paese, ma non solo, anche nel resto d'Europa, in Germania in maniera particolare, dalle banche mutualistiche. E aggiungo, e qui finisco, poi due semplici chiose a ciò che abbiamo ascoltato fino adesso. La letteratura scientifica negli ultimi anni ha preso atto e ci ha aiutato a, diciamo così, a caratterizzare anche dal punto di vista oggettivo ciò che noi proviamo a fare ogni giorno. Cito tre elementi di recentissima acquisizione. Il governatore della Banca Italia, Panetta, l'ottobre scorso disse in una conferenza internazionale che le banche cooperative, ancor prima che venisse introdotto l'acronimo ESG, già lo applicavano da tempo. Lo ha detto il governatore della Banca d'Italia, non lo diciamo noi. Secondo, la letteratura scientifica dice che dimostra che laddove esiste una banca mutualistica, lì si osserva una riduzione delle disuguaglianze di reddito, e sappiamo che le disuguaglianze sono un tema grandissimo e una minaccia seria alle democrazie liberali. Terzo, e questo è recentissimo ed è anche frutto di una collega che è qui, Carmen Mazzilis, e di un professore di economia che è nella facoltà di economia di Roma 3, professor Franco Fiordelisi, che dimostra che dove esiste una banca di cooperativo lì si osserva una riduzione della povertà. Quindi, come dire, se la letteratura scientifica ha colto e sta ora alimentando anche la nostra responsabilità, perché questa è responsabilità, non altrettanto si può dire nei corsi delle università italiane, direi anche nel resto d'Europa. Quindi un passo avanti nel rinascimento dell'economia potrebbe voler dire che così come l'Università Cattolica da 6 anni a Milano, così come l'Università di Bari da 2 anni, possano inserire degli insegnamenti o comunque aprire anche a questa forma di biodiversità negli studi curricolari, perché in questo momento, a parte queste due università, non c'è. Ci sono ovviamente delle grandissime lavori che fanno il professor Becchetti, ovviamente a Tor Vergata, anche qui a Roma 3, all'Università di Bologna, ma non ci sono degli insegnamenti. Battute finali, ringraziamo Sara perché lei aiuta a far sì che le istituzioni europee possano dare un riconoscimento istituzionale ai soggetti dell'economia sociale. Chiarisco, l'economia civile è il paradigma e la cornice culturale. L'economia sociale è una delle forme, forse la forma più incisiva di applicazione oggi dell'economia civile, e quindi fa un lavoro straordinario, e noi abbiamo deciso di aderire come Associazione delle Banche Cooperative Europee proprio alla sua associazione. E per quanto riguarda il professor Duf Weinberg, cerco di dirlo in inglese. Thank you so much, Professor. You moved our beliefs. Now we try to move our behaviors.
All right.
Thanks a lot for your effort.
Allora, ringraziando Sergio Gatti, vorrei passare a Marco Marcocci, perché anche lei rappresenta Conf Cooperative, con la responsabilità per il welfare. E a proposito di cooperative di welfare, come si può conciliare la motivazione intrinseca delle persone, che è quella poi che è stata discussa proprio nella Lezio di Duffenberg, con la responsabilità, la sostenibilità economica? Cioè, qual è il punto di rottura, se esiste, e dove risiede invece la forza?
Grazie Marzia e un buon pomeriggio a tutti. Bene, allora la domanda che mi fai Marzia è la domanda intorno alla quale noi cerchiamo di lavorare con chi vuole immaginare di realizzare la propria idea imprenditoriale in forma cooperativa. Cioè come tenere insieme la motivazione intrinseca con la sostenibilità economica. Perché, diciamo, riscontriamo in maniera molto trasparente un inverno demografico che appartiene a diverse dimensioni economiche, ma anche appartiene al nostro mondo cooperativo. Stentiamo in alcuni ambiti a intercettare le nuove vocazioni. Parlo non a caso di nuove vocazioni, mi ha colpito molto la presentazione del professore, di cui non citerò il nome e cognome per non incorrere in errori ancora più, diciamo, grossolani. Sergio ne è uscito divinamente, io farei chissà quale casino. E, è una dimensione che ha a che fare con la fiducia, che ha a che fare appunto, come dicevo, con la vocazione. Ma intanto alcune sottolineature mi consentirai di farle, perché la cooperazione intanto non è un modello alternativo all'economia, perché da qui bisogna partire. La cooperazione è l'economia civile che si fa impresa. Lo vediamo nella la partecipazione al festival con Leonardo, la declinazione puntuale di tutte le storie che vengono raccontate all'interno di quelle giornate. È un'esperienza assolutamente concreta di quello che noi descriviamo ogni volta quando parliamo di economia civile. È tanto altro, ma è anche e soprattutto quello. Dalle cooperative agricole a quelle di credito che ha descritto in maniera meravigliosa Sergio, dal welfare alla cultura, all'abitazione, al lavoro, eh, dove c'è una comunità che vuole costruire qualcosa insieme, la cooperativa, a nostro avviso, è la forma più naturale con cui realizzarla. E questo rinascimento in economia a cui oggi facciamo riferimento è, a mio avviso, anche per noi cooperatori, un riconoscimento un po' storico, no? Perché la fiducia, e qua entriamo nei termini, diciamo, che stiamo masticando insieme, è assolutamente produttiva. Il distribuire valore è assolutamente più efficiente che concentrarlo e mettere la persona al centro prima del capitale. Non è una visione rivoluzionaria di chi vuole fare chissà che, è semplicemente una buona economia. Allora, noi in questo alveo vorremmo continuare a camminare, vorremmo continuare soprattutto ad insistere in un momento storico in cui le disuguaglianze crescono e quindi dove le comunità si frammentano, noi abbiamo forte convinzione che ci sia bisogno di ancora più economia cooperativa, di ancora più economia civile. E allora il punto di forza qual è nelle cooperative di welfare? È evidentemente questa motivazione, questa forte vocazione che fa superare in talune circostanze delle limitazioni che appaiono assolutamente insormontabili. C'era un'immagine bellissima tempo fa che raccontava il modello cooperativo come quello della struttura di un calabrone. Il calabrone per struttura fisica non sarebbe capace di poter volare, non dovrebbe volare, invece vola. Noi vogliamo, ci sono dei settori in cui vogliamo con grande sacrificio, ma facciamo delle azioni straordinarie perché mettiamo in campo una passione straordinaria, ma indubbiamente, e qua vengo al tema perché non voglio svicolare, la sostenibilità economica è centrale e quindi non possiamo immaginare che tutta questa forte vocazione, partecipazione e passione naufraghi all'interno del welfare nel sacrificio di taluni, perché non può reggere per sempre. Allora ci deve essere un riconoscimento economico opportuno, dove l'offerta economica più vantaggiosa non deve essere l'unico criterio da utilizzare per la valutazione di una progettualità, ma deve essere agganciata a tutti gli altri indicatori che hanno a che fare indubbiamente con il riconoscimento del lavoro fatto e della peculiarità del lavoro, dove la cooperazione non è alternativa alle altre imprese, ma è una forma che ha le sue peculiarità. Non a caso l'articolo 45 della Costituzione così
ne riconosce la funzione sociale, quindi qualche valore forse l'avevano previsto anche i nostri padri costituenti.
Grazie. Allora, a questo punto io vorrei chiedere a Marco Marcocci che ha appena parlato, ma ovviamente anche a Sergio Gatti e alla dottoressa Sarah de Heusch, se voi doveste fare una richiesta concreta in un prossimo futuro, molto prossimo, quindi parlo del 2027, no? Quale potrebbe essere una proposta concreta da fare ai membri del governo? Vorrei partire da Sarah de Heusch, che si trova appunto in Europa, e poi andiamo avanti con i presenti qui al tavolo.
Well, to start with, there's a very concrete request that we have right now, given the EU agenda. The first one is how the EU considers competitiveness. For now, it is really in the policies the Commission has developed in the last year. It's all about big companies developing European champions and unicorns and export economy. And it's a pity because, of course, we need to develop those. But we also have to understand that the European competitiveness advantage, because we are not lagging, we are at risk of lagging in terms of competitiveness. The advantage of the EU on a global scale is also thanks to its social policies, in the sense that we have a market that is very attractive to other people because compared to the rest of the world, we have a good purchasing power. We're losing on it, but we still have it. We also have the biggest investments in the world. That's also thanks to the social protection, which allows people to also be able to put money aside. And we need to understand also that the EU needs to also have an industrial autonomy. And to have that industrial autonomy, it needs to make sure that the local supply chains are functioning. It has to build on the economic fabric of over 95% of SMEs, locally rooted enterprises that create wealth, that can export but will not delocalize, and that maintain jobs locally. If we don't focus on this as much as on the export, we will totally lose, and we will lose the advantage that we have. Another aspect of the competitiveness is digitization. Europe is lagging there concretely, and we need to create a digital world, an infrastructure and services that are aligned with the EU values of democracy, but also of sovereignty of people over the use of their data. If we don't create that, if we don't support that, another digital world compared to the Silicon Valley or the Chinese or the Russian model, we will also lose because we will lose our values. We're talking about trust today. Well, the question of trust is also linked to the digital world. If we have a digital world in which people's data is used and manipulated and used to manipulate their thoughts, if the algorithm of social media is pushing people towards their most extreme thoughts and are creating hate rather than relationships, this is also something that is dismantling our democracy and our capacity to talk together and to deliberate and to come together with common views and objectives. So this one of the key message that we're trying to push forward is, yes, we have to bet on big players, but we also have to make sure that the economy that is locally rooted and that promotes solidarity, dialogue, and trust is also necessary. And for that, we have to build on local economies, on SMEs, and economies that create trust because they also develop democracy within the enterprises and within the society, such as social economy. So this is one thing. The other thing is, if we want trust, we have to see that the mentioned objectives also have to be accompanied by proper means. Right now, at the European level, is being negotiated the next EU budget, which is the budget that will quite clearly define what's happening in Europe from the years 2028 to 2034. Well, here, there's very little for social aspects. There's very little for SMEs. It's all about competitiveness, and it's all about defense. If we Another thing is that if we want to defend the EU, what are we going to defend? Yes, of course, it's about the physical integrity of people and territories, but isn't it also about our unique model of democracy, our unique model of diversity, dialogue, and social protection, solidarity? This is what we have that is different from the rest of the world. And if the defense, the military defense, come at cost of this, we are losing our battle. And this is going to once more fragilize our democracies broadly. So in a nutshell, if I had one thing that I would ask beyond these two requests that we also already have for the EU is we have to make sure that we have indicators that are not only economic, because right now at the European level, even member states level, economic indicators are key. But we need to have social indicators that are just as important, because that's where social cohesion is. That is where trust is. If we have a system that is increasing inequalities, people do not trust the model. People don't find that democracy is working for them. So we have to make sure that we rebuild trust through clear social indicators. And there's a lot around there that are running. We just have to make sure that as a civil society, as a social economy enterprise, citizens, researchers, we come together and propose to the member states and to the European level concrete, strong indicators. There are many out there, but let's decide which ones are the ones that should guide our compass of the EU.
Grazie. Allora, vi chiedo di aiutarmi anche un pochino nei tempi, nella tempistica, perché siamo un po' addirittura d'arrivo e mi piacerebbe che partecipasse questa platea molto attenta. A proposito di quanto dicevamo prima, no? Che la cooperazione ha una grammatica. Dunque, chiedo a Sergio Gatti come vogliamo scrivere con questa grammatica nel 2026-2027.
Tanto per allungare i tempi aggiungerei anche un'altra parola, il lessico, e poi la sintassi, perché se abbiamo solo la grammatica
non andiamo avanti, vero? Sono d'accordo.
Sì, ma farò rapidissimo. Allora, a chi possiamo rivolgerci? A due soggetti. Uno è il legislatore europeo, affinché possa integrare in più quadri settoriali e normativi europei la logica e le previsioni dell'economia sociale. Naturalmente anche nel quadro normativo bancario, che rischia di essere impermeabile a causa di una serie di cose che ora non abbiamo il tempo di dire. Quindi questa è la prima grande richiesta, il soggetto è il legislatore europeo, quindi sostanzialmente la Commissione, anche se ufficialmente non lo è, il Parlamento e il Consiglio, e cioè i governi. Una seconda cosa, vorrei chiedere di andare oltre il PIL, che è uno dei 5 punti del manifesto, coraggiosamente, e anche nelle metriche di valutazione dello sviluppo dei 27 paesi si potrebbe fare un passo avanti, se non altro sperimentale, aggiungendo qualche altro elemento. Questo porta con sé una prima conseguenza non immediatamente diretta nel legislatore bancario europeo, e cioè quello di superare una volta per tutti l'approccio che viene definito one size fits all, cioè regole uguali per tutti indipendentemente dai destinatari delle regole. E qual è l'alternativa? Abbiamo due definizioni e sostanzialmente sottendono la stessa realtà. Quella statunitense, che è il tailored approach, cioè l'approccio tagliato su misura con gli stessi obiettivi di stabilità, naturalmente, a seconda della dimensione della complessità della banca a cui ci si rivolge, e l'altra, diciamo così, l'alternativa, il sinonimo, stiamo aggiungendo lessico, appunto vocaboli, un giacimento di parole e di concetti, che è quello britannico, direi ancora più interessante, perché si può sintetizzare con l'acronimo KISS, e cioè Keep It Strong and Simple, cioè mantenere ovviamente tutti i presidi di stabilità, perché la stabilità che ha raggiunto l'industria bancaria europea, in particolare quella italiana, in particolare ancora quella cooperativa italiana, è un determinante per qualsiasi iniziativa futura, ma questo non significa non renderla più proporzionata e sostanzialmente più semplice. Qual è la metrica? Come si può misurare tutto ciò? Due indicazioni. La prima è quella di valutare, non so, nel prossimo quinquennio nella prossima legislatura europea, questa non ce la si farà, l'applicazione di metriche diverse che potrebbero anche in qualche modo guidare il resto del mondo. In questo momento l'Europa non riesce magari a fare esattamente da guida, però anche lo sprone di ieri di Draghi ad Aquisgrana è interessante, cioè o ci svegliamo o siamo adesso schiacciati da una serie di apparenti nemici tra di loro, ma comunque nemici sicuramente insieme, nemici adesso, avversari, non vorrei rendere troppo bellica questa conversazione. E infine una richiesta, e chiudo con la relativa metrica, anche al mondo universitario, visto che questo è l'obiettivo fondamentale di questa iniziativa, e cioè quella di provare, lo dico molto umilmente, a introdurre elementi di teleodiversità. Che cosa vuol dire? Cioè capire che le imprese di tutti i settori, e anche quelli bancari, non hanno tutti le stesse finalità, teleos, di origine greca, perché se hanno diverse finalità, per esempio le nostre banche mutualistiche, non di massimizzazione del profitto, hanno anche delle diverse esternalità nei territori e in generale nel mercato. E se questo però non lo si approccia dal punto di vista teorico, sia nelle università, sia nelle business school, sia nei master, noi avremo classi dirigenti, gestori di impresa, decisori e politici, e ovviamente politiche, tutto ovviamente coniugato e declinato anche al femminile, che non fa fare passi avanti. Quindi la teleodiversità, non soltanto cooperativa, è fondamentale. Come lo si misura? Banalmente, dopo 3, 5, 7 anni, con il numero di tesi di laurea che gli studenti e le studentesse svolgeranno su questa teleodiversità.
Su questo argomento.
Grazie.
Grazie, Sergio Gatti. Allora, siamo quasi in conclusione. Prima di lasciare la parola a voi, e vorrei chiudere con Marco Marcocci, chiuderemo con te. L'azione, una sola, mi piacerebbe sentire come potrebbe cambiare le regole del gioco per quanto riguarda il sistema cooperativo del welfare italiano.
Marzia, vado veloce perché so che stringiamo con i tempi. Te ne dico 3, ma vado veloce. 1. Il primo momento l'abbiamo detto prima, ma lo sottolineiamo: passare dalla logica del prezzo alla logica del valore. Quando parliamo di welfare dobbiamo considerare indicatori profondamente differenti. Non vado a declinare quelli che ha già detto Sergio, su cui naturalmente c'è piena condivisione, ne aggiungo un altro e vado ancora più veloce, che è la defiscalizzazione strutturale del welfare di comunità. Il welfare aziendale è defiscalizzato, perché il welfare di comunità no? Qual è il distinguo che può consentire all'uno di esserlo e all'altro no? Il terzo, che è un'azione che invece abbiamo messo in campo, perché non sono solo richieste, ma anche azioni che devono partire dal basso, lo stiamo agendo con Sergio, col mondo bancario, che è una declinazione puntuale del welfare di prossimità, cioè mettere insieme i nostri sistemi di offerta, di proposta, e iniziare a creare quel reticolo di servizi di prossimità che, partendo dal privato, da quello che noi siamo in grado di fare, vadano ad integrare l'offerta pubblica. Quindi l'offerta delle cooperative sociali, cooperative di sanità, farmacisti, medici, società di mutuo soccorso, le piattaforme di welfare aziendale, tutti uniti per essere ancora più vicini alle esigenze di welfare delle persone. E ognuno può dare il proprio contributo, perché altrimenti abbiamo delle meravigliosi monadi che stanno in giro e non riescono a dare le risposte necessarie al bisogno di welfare che oggi è sempre più diffuso. Sono stato nei tempi?
Grazie. Mi sorprendete, avete i tempi televisivi quasi, quasi. Chiederei un commento di 4-5 minuti al professor Diefenberg e poi lasciamo la parola alla platea. Di commento. E come, please.
Okay. Again, thanks everyone for being here, and I want to say something in regards to your interesting remarks here. I just want to come back a little bit to a theme which I think is a little bit unifying. I was stressing kind of in my talk that people may feel guilty if they let others down. And I was also suggesting that people who feel let down might become antisocial and aggressive, right? And I think I was also talking about communication and how communication sort of might lead to avoiding these problems and ultimately create cooperation. And I think that was a theme that you had. Sergio was talking about banks, right? And trust problems in banks. And you were raising similar issues, Marco, and also Sarah. And I think it's important to have communication channels open if you have these emotions in the picture. And I think what's happening here today is a good move in that direction, because we are communicating and talking about these aspects.
Grazie. Grazie anche per la velocità e sottolineava il professor Diuffenberg proprio l'importanza, no, della comunicazione, delle possibilità che ci sono per appunto un'economia civile e quindi un'economia sociale, che mi viene da dire in un'unica parola magari un'economia etica, no? L'etica dell'economia. Allora, se qualcuno di voi ha piacere, vedo il professor Becchetti che insomma interviene subito, quindi immagino lei abbia il microfono, come vedi ci siamo.
I was very much inspired by the talk. I tried to make a unifying framework with policy and research. So we know that trust is a basic ingredient for economic and social prosperity. We all agree about that. And here we have the richness of our corporate environment, with companies that are very much found on trust, have social impact, like cooperatives, and but they are based on the pro-social attitude of the previous generation. So behind an organizational form, there is the sum of the impact engagement of people who have created this organization. So we have to wonder what creates trust. And Martin has shown very well with this first example that trust is so powerful that if I believe that other people trust, I don't want to let them down. I feel guilty in that case. So trust, fuel trust. Okay, so we know that. So the problem is when we represent preferences, we don't have to, they're not static. I mean, it's a simplification. We have a fight inside ourselves, Freud, Chitowski. We have a good part and a bad part. And so when the good part prevail, it depends on investment. It depends on experience. There is a very important thing this is very good for future research. In health economics, exposome, no? They create this idea. What is exposome? Exposome is the sum of our exposure to the environment that makes our health today. So the idea is there is also social exposome. So social exposome is very important. What we are today is the sum of our investment in social attitude, which depends from the primacy of the experience, what we have experienced in the past. Did we make experience of something good, like retake, doing some social activity that we enjoyed, and then we say, okay, I will do again because this is good. So my idea is, both on the side of research, to study this dynamic of how much, so we made an empirical paper where we saw that the positive sum thinking does not depend on the average value of your region. You may be in an underdeveloped region, but if your experience is being in the social sector, being an entrepreneur, it's your experience that matters, not the average of the region. So my point also to the European economy is why we should create a civic educational quantitative easing. Think of the younger generation. What is the exposome of the younger generation? They do video games. They end up being young killer gangs. If the only experience is no education in family, no education in social reality, just video games, what is their social exposome? So my point is we should, first of all, examine this in the research, but also we need a politics, an investment, I call quantitative social, civic educational quantitative easing from you, that helps people to make these experiences. So that's my point.
Thank you. Grazie, professor Becchetti. Ovviamente ha fatto un po' un commento anche delle considerazioni su quanto ha sentito, ha ascoltato da questi persone che sono qua, che hanno grande esperienza, e però puntava molto, professor Becchetti, proprio sull'esperienza anche di ognuno di noi, mettendo l'uomo proprio al centro delle economie. Quella è l'economia poi sociale e civile, quindi questa è la cosa importante. Allora, l'altra domanda quale poteva essere? Eccola là, prego. Si presenti gentilmente.
Thank you. It was very interesting. I'm sorry?
Yes.
Oh, I'm
Yes.
Dina Agarwal. I spoke in the morning, so I'm in the program.
Okay.
I have one is a question to Martin, question comment, and a small comment to Mr. Marco. Yes. So you ended with the question that the reasons, you gave us 2 reasons of why people should keep their word, promises and threats. Are there other reasons beyond that? And at the end, you just showed us a picture. So I want to share at least 4 reasons why you could, beyond promises and threats, people would keep their word, and see how you can build it into your model. One is just ethical. Now, ethics can come from religion. It could also come from culture. I mean, if you think of Japan in the 60s, people were honest, or that was the general reputation. The second could be reputation loss. You know, it used to be in Victorian times, I'm a person of my word. Usually it was man of my word. I would say I'm a woman of my word. So reputation loss and respect is a second reason why you'd keep your word. The third is interdependence. So I've done a lot of research on village communities across South Asia. And if you talk to the women and say, well, you know, I have to sort out my any differences between us, because today I'm borrowing sugar from her and tomorrow she will be borrowing from me. So just neighborly interdependence would be why you would keep your word. And the fourth is social monitoring. I mean, there's so much of collective action theory, and let's just go back to simple principles by Ostrom, that you socially monitor and therefore you keep your word. So these are the 4, and how do you actually build that in? If I may, my very quick comment to Mr. Marco, because you listed, I could hear only part of what you said, but you're listed as a director of cooperation, and that's a big thing. And you mentioned, I think, agricultural cooperatives. I know a little bit about agricultural cooperatives. And I feel that we use the word cooperatives in a very general, vague, untheorized way. I'm not saying you're doing that, but it's very important to theorize it in relation to the things we are talking about. Why do we cooperate? So just in terms of agricultural cooperatives, most agricultural cooperatives are just marketing cooperatives. You're a member of a very large group. Almost every country in Europe has a dairy cooperative. There are millions of members. You're a member. No issue of actual cooperation is involved. Trust is not involved. I mean, maybe a little bit, but not greatly. Compared to that, think of small farmers cooperating in order to produce together. It's an everyday cooperation. It requires monitoring, it requires trust, or if you're managing a water body or you're managing a forest. So these are 2 very different cooperatives, one requiring no cooperation and other requiring everyday cooperation. And it seems to me that both of these, you require much more theorizing now before we understand what cooperatives are.
Thank you so much for the question. And I have a response to what you said to me. And it's 3 things, okay? First, maybe the picture wasn't super clear. It's taken outside San Crispino Gelateria, close to Fontana di Trevi, one of the best gelaterias in town. It was me in the picture, and I was in one of these Pinocchio things, right? So my nose had grown, maybe didn't see. So that was the 3rd theory, the nose growing theory, okay? Then thank you for a bunch of other, my second comment is, thank you for the bunch of other reasons people keep promises. I just want to point out, remember I had green and purple on an early slide with all the things you can do with psychological game theory. And many of the ones you mentioned are in there, but I didn't touch on them, like reputation building, is something which is, that was the social image part of that I mentioned in passing, right? So that leads me to my 3rd comment, and it was one of the references I had up there was the article that Pier Paolo Battigalli and I published in the Journal of Economic Literature in 2022. It's a 50-page survey about every cool thing that you can do with the framework of psychological game theory. So I think some of the fantastic things you mentioned are sort of touched upon therein, and I recommend everyone read it.
Grazie, grazie davvero. Allora, siamo arrivati a conclusione di questa sessione, che io ringrazio ovviamente di aver partecipato. Voglio dire che adesso ci sarà un'altra sessione dedicata al Local Development Participation in Social Civile Economy, quindi è un'altra sessione molto interessante. Ringrazio il professor Diuffenberg, grazie davvero di aver partecipato a questa sessione. Ovviamente vedo Sarah de Heusch, che ringrazio tantissimo, così come Sergio Gatti, Marco Marcocci, e non ci dimentichiamo di Stefano Papa, che ha aperto questa sessione. Grazie davvero a tutti.
Grazie a Marzia.
Buon lavoro. Grazie a
Grazie a
te,
voi.
professore. Bravi.